I grew up in a town where every secret had a patron saint. The church bells didn't just mark the hours. They kept time with the things no one wanted to say aloud. My family was devoted, or at least that's what we told ourselves. Sunday mornings meant ironed dresses, wooden pews, the scent of incense heavy enough to choke on. And my uncle, Deacon Richard, was always there, standing at the altar, smiling like the face of forgiveness itself. When I was a child, I thought his voice sounded holy. When I got older, I realized it just sounded practiced. My parents divorced when I was 15. The official reason was irreconcilable differences, but even then, the story didn't sit right. My mother stopped going to Mass. My father stopped speaking to his brother, and every time I asked what happened, my mother would just say, "Some sins are forgiven in silence." That silence raised me more than either of them did. Years passed. I left for college, studied journalism, then switched to law. Words, evidence, testimony. I wanted to know how truth worked when it wasn't whispered through a screen or hidden under prayer. It wasn't faith I'd lost. It was patience. The first time I saw my uncle again, he was giving a sermon about redemption. His hair was gray now, his voice softer, but his eyes, those same calm, empty eyes, hadn't changed. He spoke about the beauty of confession, about the courage it takes to tell the truth. And I realized he had made a career out of pretending to be absolved. That night, I asked my mother again. It was him, wasn't it? She froze, the way someone does when a wound they thought was scar tissue turns out to still bleed. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He ruined your father. He ruined us." She never said how. But she didn't need to. Her voice broke on the word ruined, and that was enough. It took me years to uncover the details. Old court transcripts, property transfers, letters sealed in the parish archives. Turns out my uncle had been advising my father's business partner, counseling him, helping him manage his guilt. He had known about the affair before my mother did. He had known everything, and instead of stopping it, he used it. He advised, manipulated, and guided them all, for spiritual clarity. My father's confession had become his leverage. That was the day I stopped believing in forgiveness. So, I built a new kind of confessional, a courtroom. After law school, I didn't become a lawyer. I became a court reporter, the invisible listener, the recorder of every word, every lie, every oath broken in the name of truth. The first time I typed the phrase, "Do you swear to tell the truth?" I almost laughed. Swearing to tell the truth felt so much like swearing in church. The same solemn voice, the same empty ritual. But in court, the truth doesn't hide behind mercy. It stays on record. I began collecting stories. Not gossip, evidence, not rumors, transcripts. I listened and I learned the language of confession without absolution. And all the while, my uncle rose higher in the parish. He spoke at retreats, appeared in the local paper, hosted youth groups about moral guidance. I waited, because revenge, I've learned, doesn't have to be loud. It can be as quiet as a pen hitting paper, as slow as a prayer whispered backward. The night I decided to act, I sat in my car outside St. Agnes Church, watching the lights glow behind the stained glass. Inside, he would be hearing confessions, nodding, murmuring, absolving, pretending to wash sins away, but I was done whispering. It was time for his story to be told the same way he'd once used others' secrets, in public and on record. The courtrooms where I worked never smelled like incense. They smelled like paper and sweat and fear. Every sound echoed, the shuffle of a chair, the dry click of my stenograph keys, the low tremor of someone lying under oath. I liked it. Truth here wasn't holy, it was procedural. And unlike in church, there was always a record. My uncle Deacon Richard had no idea I worked for the court. He still sent Christmas cards signed blessings, Uncle Rick. He still posted photos of baptisms, fundraisers, charity drives. But I watched him differently now. Not as family, as a man collecting sins like currency. And as I learned more about the law, I began to notice patterns, cases that brushed against the church, people who'd once been counseled by him, whispers of guidance that turned into ruin. There were always paper trails, If you knew where to look, I started keeping my own files, private, unofficial, a quiet archive of the lives he'd damaged under the guise of forgiveness. One man had confessed to embezzling church funds, and my uncle had helped negotiate restitution, pocketing a consulting fee. A young woman had come forward about an affair with a parish board member, and her story vanished after a donation to a Catholic charity he oversaw. These weren't sins. They were transactions, and he was the broker. The more I learned, the more I saw how he'd perfected it. He weaponized confession, turned people's guilt into leverage, their secrets into tools. He'd been doing it for decades, and then, quietly, something strange began to happen. His name started showing up in the periphery of cases I transcribed. Small claims, community disputes, nothing headline-worthy but enough to notice. He was always offering counsel, providing mediation, supporting reconciliation. And every time he was mentioned, I felt that small click in my chest, like the gears of something inevitable turning. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I waited until his parish hosted its annual fundraising gala, the one covered by the local paper, complete with a photo spread and donation list. That's where I saw the names. Several donors were the same people whose confidential issues I had typed in court. It was all there, the network of guilt, control, and quiet transactions. The church wasn't just his pulpit. It was his front. I began collecting documents, public records, transcripts, property filings, donation receipts. Every piece connected back to him. And the irony wasn't lost on me. I was building my own confession file. But unlike his, mine would be shared. One night, after court, I drove to the church again. The confessional light was on, red, glowing softly like a warning. I sat in the last pew, listening to the murmur of voices inside the booth. His voice, calm, measured, gentle. When the penitent left, I walked up to the booth and stepped inside. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," I said. Silence. Then, "How long has it been since your last confession?" 15 years, I said. "And this one isn't for forgiveness." The divider between us cast his shadow across my side. He sounded confused. "I'm not sure I understand." "You will," I said softly, "when you hear your own voice played back." I slid a small recorder onto the shelf between us. There was a sharp intake of breath, the kind that sounds like guilt waking up. He didn't speak after that. Not to me, not for days, but the silence told me everything. He knew what I knew. He just didn't know what I'd do with it. The morning after I left the recorder in the booth, I woke with a calm I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't satisfaction. It was clarity, the kind you feel when something long rotten finally surfaces into light. I didn't listen to the tape right away. I went to work as usual, typing testimony, time-stamping words, preserving stories that weren't mine. But all day I could feel it, the weight of that small black device in my bag, humming like a secret heartbeat. When I finally pressed play that night, the sound that filled my apartment wasn't what I expected. It wasn't denial. It wasn't outrage. It was prayer. My uncle's voice shaking, pleading with God, or maybe with himself. If this is punishment, let it be mine alone, he knew. He understood that the walls were closing in. I should have felt pity. Instead, I felt balance. Over the next few weeks, I started to move quietly, piece by piece. I compiled documents, audio clips, donation ledgers, court references. I built the story he'd buried under sermons, and then I submitted it, not as a relative, not as a victim, but as a professional, anonymously, to a journalist I trusted, the same one who once covered my uncle's charity galas. The headline appeared 2 weeks later. Deacon's Confessions, a pattern of manipulation in the parish. The article was careful, sourced, factual. It didn't name victims. It didn't sensationalize. It simply connected the dots, the donations, the conflicts of interest, the misuse of confessional knowledge. My uncle's photograph ran beneath the headline. That same serene expression he'd always worn, now surrounded by ink and implication. The parish exploded. Some called it blasphemy. Others whispered finally. The church released a statement. The bishop promised an investigation, and for the first time in his life, my uncle stepped down from the pulpit. He claimed it was for health reasons. Everyone knew better. A week later, I saw him outside the church. He looked smaller, not older, just reduced, like a shadow of himself. He approached me slowly, the wind tugging at his coat. "You did this," he said. Not a question. "No," I said. "You did." He studied me, eyes full of something I couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or recognition. "I was trying to help people," he said. "You were helping yourself," I replied. "And you called it mercy." He opened his mouth to speak again, but I turned away. That night, I returned to the courtroom. Empty, silent after hours. I sat at my desk and opened a fresh transcript file. I typed one sentence. "In the matter of truth versus silence, truth will always call itself to the stand." I saved it. Not as part of any case, just as a reminder. The church bells rang the next morning, but they sounded different. Not solemn, not holy. Just hollow, like something inside them had cracked. My mother called that evening. She had read the article. She didn't say thank you. She didn't have to. Her silence this time was different. Not shame, not fear. Peace. My uncle left town soon after. No trial, no arrest. Just exile. But his name, once spoken with reverence, now carried a tremor. I didn't destroy him. I revealed him. And that was enough. Still, some nights I drive past St. Agnes and park in the empty lot. The lights are off. The booth is dark. I imagine the old confessional, the red bulb above the door. I imagine someone sitting inside, whispering the truth into the dark. And I wonder if, somewhere, he's doing the same. Not for forgiveness, but because he finally knows how it feels to be heard. Months passed. Winter came early that year, soft, pale, and soundless. The church bells still rang, but fewer people came. The pews stood half empty, dust gathering in the corners. The scandal had left cracks no one could plaster over. But I didn't feel triumph. I felt the weight of aftermath, how truth, once spoken, can echo too long. One Sunday morning I returned. Not for mass, not for confession, just to sit in the back, where the light hit the old stained glass and painted the floor in trembling color. The new priest didn't know who I was. He spoke softly, with care, as if trying to repair something fragile. He talked about grace, the kind that comes after truth, not before it. I closed my eyes. For the first time in years, the word didn't sting. After the service, I walked to the booth. It had been replaced. New wood, new curtains, a faint smell of varnish. But to me it was still the same. A small room built for the weight of words. I stepped inside. The seat creaked beneath me, and I began to speak, not to God, not to any priest, to myself. "Forgive me," I said softly, "for confusing vengeance with healing." The silence answered back. "Forgive me for carrying his sins longer than my own." Another pause. The air felt thick, warm. "And forgive me for finally letting go." The words hung there, trembling, like dust caught in sunlight. And then I exhaled, a slow, shuddering breath that felt like it came from a lifetime ago. Outside, the world was changing. Snow melted into cold rain, dripping down the stone steps. Children ran past me in bright coats, laughing, alive, a sound of pure joy. Something I hadn't heard in that place for years. I sat on the edge of the fountain across the street and looked back. The church windows glowed faintly from the inside, light finding its way through broken glass. That's how it always happens, I thought. Light doesn't wait for permission. It finds the cracks, and it enters anyway. A few weeks later, I was assigned to cover a new case, a small-town fraud trial. Nothing special. But as I typed the first words of the transcript, I realized something. Truth wasn't just a weapon. It was also a cure, if you used it gently enough. I didn't need the booth anymore. My work was the confession. My sentences were the prayers. My record of the world. The quiet penance I chose to keep. One night, I found my mother sitting by the window, reading a paper. The article about my uncle had yellowed with age, tucked under a stack of newer headlines. She didn't mention it, and I didn't ask. We sat in silence for a long while. Then she said, "He never came back." "I know. Do you forgive him?" I looked outside, at the fading light, the reflection of the church spire in the glass. "Maybe forgiveness isn't a door," I said. "Maybe it's just a window we learn to open again." She smiled faintly. "That sounds like something your father used to say." I smiled back. That's because he was probably trying to believe it too. Later that night, I wrote one final entry, not for the paper, not for the court, not for anyone. Just for me. Confession doesn't belong to the church. It belongs to those brave enough to tell the truth and still stay kind. I closed the notebook, exhaled, and felt something small and miraculous settle inside me. Not victory, not vengeance, peace. The next morning, as dawn crept over the town, I heard the bells again. Same sound, different meaning, and I realized I didn't need to be the one who rang them. It was enough to know I had been heard.